So something just happened that hasn't happened since 1917. And well, it is not a good thing. You see, many economists are saying that what just happened is the first domino to fall in the changing of the world economic order. So what is this? Well, let's take you back to 1917. In 1917, the US government introduced Liberty bonds to finance its entry into World War I. To ensure investors of the safety of these bonds, credit rating agencies like Moody's, established in 1909, began assigning ratings, eventually granting the US a top-tier AAA rating. This rating signified the nation's strong economic position and its commitment to repaying its debts. So the United States essentially invented the credit rating system just so that they could borrow money to go and shoot Germans. Amazing, the most American thing I can think of. Post-World War II, the US emerged as a global economic leader. The Bretton Woods system pegged other currencies to the US dollar, which was convertible to gold, reinforcing international trust in the United States economy. Government debt remained manageable, and Keynesian economics guided fiscal policies by promoting spending during economic downturns and saving during economic booms. Oh, little did they know how much money we would eventually spend during economic downturns, but we'll get to that in a second. Because in 1971, President Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility into gold, transitioning the United States to a fiat currency system. You see, the genius economists at the time said that this move granted greater economic flexibility in monetary policy. It allowed the government and the central bank to do more than they were allowed to do at the time. And what that really led to, which a lot of you have heard about today, which is unlimited money printing, something that has had no side effects for us whatsoever. You can thank 1971 and taking us off the gold standard for that genius part of economics. Now, in the 1980s, the Reagan administration implemented significant tax cuts and increased defense spending, leading to a tripling of the national debt. However, despite this extremely fast, exponentially increasing rising debt in the 80s, the US maintained its perfect AAA credit rating because it was still the dominant empire of the world, and many investors still had loads of confidence in the United States economy. In fact, tripling the debt pretty much got the United States more respect, if anything. So the United States was kind of like the house flipper of the time in the 1980s. It took out some debt, it was renovating its house, it was building up the infrastructure, it's putting in a nice bathroom here. It was ripping out the carpet, putting in some hardwood floors, and as it turns out, their house afterwards doubled in value. Now yes, they still had that debt, but the overall value of the house shot up further than the debt. Fast forward a little bit to President Clinton. The US achieved a budget surplus from 1998 to 2001. This was a pretty rare fiscal feat at the time. The period of economic prosperity and fiscal responsibility further solidified the nation's strong credit rating. However, this brief period of sobriety for fiscal responsibility in the United States would not last, because the United States, they love their deficits. The early 2000s saw significant tax cuts and increased military spending under President George W. Bush, leading to a return of large budget deficits. And despite all of this, the United States still maintained its AAA credit rating, largely due to its economic size, its military dominance, and the dollar's reserve currency status. So yes, even at the same time where the country was waging a $1 trillion war and giving tax cuts and using deficits to fund all of that, still the country was not going to drop in its credit rating. But then, enter, my friends, something that you may have heard of called the 2008 financial crisis. This giant crisis led to massive government bailouts and a surge in national debt. The Federal Reserve's quantitative easing policies, pretty much known today as money printing, aimed to stabilize the economy, but concerns about long-term fiscal health began to surface. In 2011, S&P, also known as Standard & Poor's, downgraded the US credit rating from AAA to AA+. Boom! They were citing political dysfunction and concerns over the nation's fiscal trajectory. This marked the first time that the US had ever lost a perfect credit rating score from any of the major credit agencies. However, over the next decade, everything got cleaned up. Wall Street got regulated, started paying down the debt, everything just went fine afterwards. Oh wait, the exact opposite of that happened. Because over the next decade, the US continued to grapple with rising debt and political gridlock. While Keynesian economics remained influential, Keynesian just means interventional, discussions around modern monetary theory gained traction, suggesting that countries controlling their own currency could sustain higher deficits without any consequences. Think about that. This was the economic thought in the 2010s and still persists today. Fast forward to 2020, money printing skyrocketed, debt skyrocketed, deficit skyrocketed. Everything was skyrocketing except for everyone's hopes and dreams. But in 2023, Fitch Ratings downgraded the US credit rating to AA+ as well, the second major agency to do this. They were once again citing fears on the United States' national debt and fiscal policy. And that brings us to what happened this week. On May 16th of 2025, Moody's Investors Service stripped the United States of its last remaining perfect credit rating score, dropping it to AA1. So to put this in perspective, the last 15 years or so, the United States has kind of been voted off of the perfect credit rating island on Survivor. And there were only 3 people voting, and everyone knew that the third vote really didn't matter that much because the US was not going to control its debt and its credit rating would drop eventually. But this was that final vote to be like, oh, the United States debt is actually a problem. So with this move, all 3 major credit rating agencies, the S&P, Fitch, and now Moody's, have officially downgraded the United States for what boils down to 2 things: unsustainable debt levels, and a political system that makes kindergarten look like a Geneva Convention. So Moody's cited debt is projected to exceed 130% of GDP by 2035, interest payments hitting a record $1.6 trillion in the next few years. It has no realistic path to fiscal consolidation, and it has a rising risk of fiscal crisis due to legislative dysfunction. And so this is something that I always try to bring up. The entire world is busy complaining and arguing about, drag shows and whether or not to use gas ovens, or what's going on at certain celebrities' trials. And this is the thing that everyone should be focusing on. This is how countries actually collapse. Not any of those other things you argue about on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok. So what does this all mean? Well, it's not just a slap on the wrist for America. It's more of like a symbolic funeral for the illusion that America's credit is untouchable. So after this announcement, yield on 10-year treasuries rose from 4.32% to 4.56% within, just a few hours. The US will now pay more to borrow money than countries like Switzerland, Germany, Czechia, and Canada. However, Canada will be on this list soon for getting downgraded. Mark my words for that. Because this country voted in a prime minister just to get a 10-second clip of him standing up to Trump face to face. Meanwhile, he said right on his party plan, he will run the largest deficits in the history of this country for his entire term. But it's okay. It's okay. Everyone's fine with that. We got the 10-second clip. This country does not care how many generations of young people it needs to sacrifice. It needed to get that clip. But again, one of the biggest red flags for Moody's in its downgrade is the amount of money it's going to be spending on interest payments. So within the next few years, potentially by this year if things go poorly, the United States might be spending more on interest on its debt than it will be on its military. Now, for someone like myself, growing up, everyone would complain how much money the United States was spending on its military. And now, that astronomical number will be surpassed by interest on the debt. Imagine if in your personal life, with all of your expenses, your rent was, $1,500 a month, your electricity bill, your internet, whatever, imagine all of that, and your biggest expense was your credit card bill. And by credit card bill, I just mean paying off the interest on your credit card. That is what the United States of America is doing. So why does this matter for the United States and the average person? Well, as I mentioned earlier, the cost of borrowing will get more expensive for the United States, meaning that as they keep borrowing more money, they will have to spend more money on interest on that newly borrowed money, and then they'll have to borrow more money eventually in the future, and then that'll downgrade their credit rating, and so on and so forth. That pretty much we're getting to a point in the United States where the debt spiral has started, meaning that if the country keeps borrowing money, they will keep losing their credit rating, have it go down, and then that'll make borrowing more expensive, and it'll keep happening. Downgrade, more expensive, downgrade, more expensive. And for the average person, well, things like loans, mortgages, and business capital, that all could be more expensive for everyone pretty soon. So Let's zoom out a little bit here. The US is still the biggest kid on the playground, but the ground is starting to shake a little bit. As China, India, and other emerging markets rise, the rest of the world is wondering, can America be trusted with the keys to the global economy still? If the dollar keeps weakening, what replaces it? If the US Treasuries lose their status as risk-free, what happens to everything that depends on them? We're seeing central banks buy gold at a record pace because they're nervous that the United States dollar is just going to collapse or the United States can't pay anything back. BRICS countries are pushing for de-dollarization. And kind of every other country in the world is looking at the United States as more of like that drunk uncle that was really popular in the 80s. But now they're just crazy and going bankrupt. And so here is to summarize the key issues with why this was such big news. There's now going to be a reduced investor appetite in the United States and its treasuries. There will be more pressure on the US dollar, leading to further inflation. There will be higher borrowing costs, meaning trillions of dollars in more interest over the next decade. This is arguably the beginning of the end of American financial hegemony of the world. And the last thing, there's no exit plan. The United States doesn't want to stop spending money, and when they do and cut government expenses and government jobs, everyone gets in an uproar. And they're just going to keep going. You know, I've kind of viewed the United States government fiscal policy as almost like a drug addict. The United States has had decades to finally get off the drugs, get clean, go to rehab, and there was a chance to do that with Bill Clinton. 3 years of sobriety. But now what has been happening, especially since 2008, is that instead of taking maybe a 2 or 3 year downturn that would correct everything, because it is still possible to right the ship, 2 to 3 years of pain would correct this. But instead of doing that, the United States will continue to get hopped up on drugs. It doesn't want to feel any withdrawal symptoms. And eventually, instead of potentially going through a minor withdrawal, it will be a horrible ending for the country. So thank you very much for watching. Make sure to check out my YouTube Creator Academy in the link down below to learn how to make videos just like this. And make sure to click on my documentaries playlist to see more videos like this on my channel. So click on that, and I'll see you guys in a few seconds.